will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on how federal energy production supports local communities. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member. I ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, be allowed to participate in today's hearing and be recognized for 5 minutes to deliver an opening statement. Without objection, so ordered. Welcome to a new day in the House of Representatives and therefore on the Energy and Minerals Subcommittee. For the last 4 years, under Democrat control, this subcommittee has preached a keep it in the ground mantra, regardless of its world impact. And this mantra includes banning lands from mineral development, arbitrarily raising royalty rates, sidelining American workers at the behest of the wealthy, and importing foreign energy and minerals whenever possible. But no longer. The Energy and Mineral Resources Subcommittee will now focus on putting Americans back to work. The subcommittee will focus on traveling out of the Beltway and into the parts of our great nation where we find these natural resources. And that's why I am so pleased to have our first hearing where it belongs, sitting right on top of the Great Permian Basin. It'll focus on reshoring our supply chains to prioritize domestic sources of minerals. My great state of Minnesota, for example, has unparalleled mineral wealth with currently untouchable amounts of copper, nickel, cobalt, and platinum group metals. And no, domestic does not mean from across the Atlantic or from across our northern border. Domestic means domestic. Domestic means from our 50 states plus our territories. The subcommittee will also focus on boosting American oil and gas development on our federal lands and waters. We have been endowed with the greatest resources in the world. We can use them to keep costs down and leverage an international geopolitical advantage. And we'll focus on other issues as relevant too, whether it's permitting for energy transmission lines or removing barriers to motivate energy technologies such as geothermal energy. But today, we're focusing on how oil and gas development boosts our local communities. This morning, we took a tour across the border into Lee County, New Mexico. To date, the oil and gas industry has contributed $51.1 million to Lee County alone for education. And more broadly, oil and gas development accounts for 1/3 of New Mexico's general fund revenue. Housing assistance, public safety, food programs, transportation programs, health care, and infrastructure, all of which are funded by oil and gas receipts. The Mineral Leasing Act is the law. That means that we must issue oil and gas leases at least quarterly, and the benefits of those lease sales and royalties at the state level means more money for students, teachers, and our communities. So why has there been a significant hostility to development in New Mexico since Joe Biden became president, especially when it's such a boon for education? It is not the same oil and gas find as West Texas, the Permian Basin, where operators could easily follow the prescribed rules and the regulations. Sadly, it's because my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and this administration choose ideology over the law. In New Mexico, with such an expansive Bureau of Land Management land, the federal government permits by decree. Government decides that oil and gas is going to end in 10 years. They won't issue a permit. Or maybe they'll issue a permit for one parcel, but slow walk an easement for a pipeline through another. Or maybe the government decides a chicken or a lizard needs to be added to the endangered species list. There are countless ways for bureaucrats to slow walk a project to death, just like they have in northern Minnesota, all of which are methods to permit by decree. Contrast this with Texas across the state line. In West Texas, the Texas Railroad Commission permits by rule. You have a proposal, You follow the rules, you receive your permits. When permitting by decree, the administration picks and chooses winners and losers. And unfortunately, even when American operators do it the cleanest in the world and provide tens of millions of dollars to schools, this administration has decreed that oil and gas operators must lose in New Mexico. And this isn't the only case where the government picks winners and losers. Just last month, Joe Biden chose to ban mining in more than 225,000 acres of an industrial working forest called the Superior National Forest, the district that I represent. It is the biggest copper nickel find in the world. 95% of our nickel reserves, 88% of our copper reserves, and over a third, 88% of our cobalt rather, and over a third of our copper and other platinum group metals, purely for political reasons, banned mining in northern Minnesota. But just 41 miles north, in the very same watershed, Canada permitted an open pit gold mine in under 3 years. Joe Biden decreed that my constituents are not allowed to mine domestic critical minerals. Meanwhile, miners in Canada simply followed their rules and they received a permit. It's wrong, it's misguided, and it's time we hold them accountable. With that, I look forward to this discussion today with our three witnesses, and I recognize the full committee chair, Bruce Resserman, for his opening statement now.
Well, thank you, Pete. Good afternoon to everyone. August, it is an honor to be here in your district again. The last time I was here, it was you and I and then Leader McCarthy, who's now Speaker McCarthy. And you know that cold day when we had that press conference outside, we were laying the groundwork for this meeting today. We were talking about American energy independence. We were talking about cutting supply lines that depended on China and Russia and foreign adversaries. And that was part of the making of the commitment to America. And this is like step number 2 or 3 in the commitment to America. And we've got a long ways to go to make sure that America is energy independent, that we're not relying on foreign allies for the things, or foreign adversaries for the things that we have to keep our economy functioning and to keep Americans safe. It's great to have Pete here. He's the chairman of the Energy and Minerals Subcommittee that deals under the guise of the Natural Resources Committee on all things energy and minerals, onshore, offshore, mining, and Tom Tiffany, who's the chairman of the Federal Land Subcommittee and deals with a tremendous amount of issues and natural resources under federal lands. We also deal with water and wildlife, the Endangered Species Act, NEPA. All those things fall under the jurisdiction of our committee, and energy production starts under the jurisdiction of this committee. As I mentioned earlier, Kathy McMorris-Rogers, the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, will be here Thursday for another hearing where they'll talk about the hurdles that Americans are facing downstream in refining and processing and getting the permits on those downstream manufacturing and processing areas that are so critical to creating even more jobs and even more national security. You know, last week we had a hearing in D.C. We titled it "Unleashing America's Energy Potential," and it shined a light on the policies that are preventing us from achieving those goals today. And our goal is to make sure that we're using the tools of the federal government to somehow get the bureaucrats off of dead center so that they'll do their job to issue permits. It doesn't make sense when you go out and talk to folks in the field and you ask them, is there any difference between a permit that was obtained in a relatively short period of time through a state permitting agency versus a permit obtained over a long period of time through the Bureau of Land Management? And I've had people tell me for years, over and over, you can't go out and look at a project completed under a state permit or a federal permit and tell any difference to the environmental restrictions and the guidelines, to the quality of the project. it all ends in the same result. So we, as federal policymakers, we have to ask the question, are America's tax dollars best being spent by these federal bureaucracies that aren't producing results? They're becoming more of a hindrance instead of part of the solution. You know, we don't want the federal government to be part of the problem. We want the federal government to be part of the solution, and it's under our power to put those policies in place, and I believe ultimately to use the power of the purse to make sure that those policies are implemented. There's no reason whatsoever that the President of the United States should ever go to Saudi Arabia or Venezuela or God forbid, Russia or any other place to ask them to make up the supply of energy that we could be producing here at home. There should never be another time in our future when the President of the United States depletes the strategic petroleum reserve to lower prices instead of focusing on the real economic issue, and that's low supply. We have to increase supply so that we don't see these inflationary costs and these instances where we've got fuel prices at the pump going through the roof. And we know that transportation fuel is only part of it. Natural gas is one of the cleanest burning, most efficient burning fuels on the planet because we've been able to utilize a lot of natural gas. America's been able to lower our greenhouse gas emissions more than the top 12 countries in the Climate Paris Accord combined. Natural gas produced in the United States, one report shows is 41% cleaner than natural gas produced by Vladimir Putin. You've got a lot of oil in the Permian Basin, you've got a lot of gas in the Permian Basin, but the largest deposit of natural gas on the planet is in the Marcellus and Utica shale play out in Pennsylvania. Yet we can't build pipelines up to New England, and when all of this was going on with Russia and people were talking about us buying energy from Russia, we were buying liquefied natural gas, bringing it into the port of Boston to supply gas to New England residents instead of building pipelines from Pennsylvania to New England. That just plain doesn't make sense, and it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't require Congress having to have hearings and pass laws to do the right thing. But if that's what it takes, I know that there's 3 other gentlemen here and about 220 or 218 more or 19 more in Washington, D.C. that are wanting to do the same thing, to put common sense back into the equation, to look out for America's needs and America's resources, and to also do this in a way that generates wealth and provides American jobs instead of shipping our jobs overseas. So I think the witnesses that are here today, I enjoyed reading your testimony. I look forward to hearing your oral testimony and then having a chance to ask questions and to find out more about these issues so that it can inform us to write legislation that we should be marking up and passing out of the House in early March. And hopefully you'll see a broad energy package coming out of the House of Representatives by the end of March to address these issues. And I really believe we'll get some bipartisan support and that even some bicameral support in the Senate, because Americans are tired of having to depend on other countries and not have the national security and having the huge cost for energy. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Westerman. The chairman now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for 5 minutes to deliver an opening statement and to introduce our witness from Texas, Ms. Bentley.
Well, thank you very much to the entire Committee on Natural Resources, Chairman Westerman, and my colleagues from Minnesota and Wisconsin for being here. It's very important that we have a hearing here in the Permian Basin, Odessa, Texas, talking about the issues. I'd like to specifically thank University of Texas Permian Basin to be able to pull together a hearing. Dr. Sandy Woodley, the entire staff here, thank you. Ector County Judge Dustin Fawcett, the Mayor of Odessa, Texas, Javier Hoven, and the President of the Chamber of Commerce, Renee Earls, thank you for being here, for your support, and so many others, Sheriff Mike Griffiths and so many others that are here. You know, the hearing was open to all members of the committee, Republican and Democrat, and I think what's telling right now is that we want to have this bipartisan discussion. We want to talk across the aisle to our colleagues about the issues that we're facing, because this should not be a partisan issue to put energy in an inexpensive, reliable form that every American family can enjoy, that increases our economic prowess, that helps our national security, that we're able to deliver across the ocean to places like Ukraine or other countries that are being threatened or held hostage by adversaries or would-be adversaries. This should not be a partisan discussion. We should be able to come together. And it's disappointing to see a lack of participation in a field hearing like this. If you're willing to attack this industry, then come out and see it. And we've invited those members that do. And I think that's important to note, that we don't have those folks showing up right now. But we do have folks showing up that want to make a change, that want to talk about the very issues that you've just heard. You know, when you look at the Permian Basin, Texas is lucky to be on the private side. But today we're probably going to spend some time talking about the federal land side. My very first piece of legislation in Congress, H.R. 218, talked about preventing the Biden administration from placing a moratorium on federal leasing or drilling or the permitting of pipelines. That was in advance of President Biden taking the oath of becoming president. That was in the first week of January of 21, because we knew, based on his campaign promises, that he was going to attack the industry, and here we are. And so while Texas is lucky, other parts of the United States do have to go through the federal permitting. And that's one of the things that we need to talk about today. When you're looking to supply energy needs for America, President Biden's first call should have been, his first visit should have been to Odessa, Texas, not Saudi Arabia. He shouldn't have called Putin or Venezuela. He should have come right here to the Permian Basin to ask what the producers here, what all of you in this room and throughout this community can do. You know, globally, the share of crude oil production coming from the Permian has grown 1% in 07 to nearly 6%, from 2007 to 6%. At one point in late 2019, early 2020, this region was doing almost 14%, 15% of global production on a daily basis, 13 plus million barrels a day. That is increasing economic security, not just for the United States of America, but for our allies. That is increasing the jobs that every community has, the 10 million Americans who participate in this industry. And the fact is that the Permian Basin is the largest secure supply of oil and gas in the entire world and remains a safe harbor of stability and opportunity. And by investing in the Permian Basin, America is investing in our own future. It's my pleasure to introduce you to the witness from the Permian Basin, Tracy Bentley, who is an incredible leader in charge of the Permian Strategic Partnership with a membership of 19 companies, a model for what private partnerships with public entities can do. By investing in our education, by investing in healthcare, by investing in infrastructure needs, not just right here in Midland, Odessa, but also into New Mexico, by taking private dollars and putting them to work so that families can enjoy high-quality education and high-quality healthcare, and that they can have a safe transit and a safe commute, that our roads and our bridges and our highways are safe. Tracy brings a wealth of knowledge, coming to us from Colorado prior to this, and running a large trade organization responsible for encouraging investment in the energy industry inside New Mexico. I know that we are going to be very, very happy and pleased to hear her testimony, and I can't wait to hear the questions asked, because when it comes to the communities, the investments that those communities are making into energy security, which is a national security issue, nobody knows this better than Tracy Bentley, and nobody knows it better on the impact that it has on every American family who decides to take this up as a career, to put food on the table and to put their kids through college and raise their families than Tracy Bentley. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for coming to the Permian Basin. Thank you for coming to Odessa, Texas. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Pfluger. Now I am going to introduce our other witnesses. The Honorable David Gallegos hails from Eunice, New Mexico, and represents the 41st District in the New Mexico State Senate. Mr. Doug Ackerman is from Santa Fe, New Mexico, and serves as the president and CEO of the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. So let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When we use timing lights, when you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute left, the light in front of you will turn yellow, and at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red. And I will ask you to please complete your statement by that time. I will also allow all witnesses on the panel to testify before member questioning. So the chair now recognizes Senator Gallegos for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chairman Wasserman and Vice Chair or Committee Chair, Subcommittee Chairman Stauber, and honorable members. It's an honor to be here today to testify before you and to discuss the significant contributions that onshore federal oil and gas production provides for my community in southeast New Mexico. My name is David Gallegos. I'm honored to serve on the New Mexico State Senate. I've been for District 41, 61 was my house number. Previously served in the New Mexico House of Representatives, and during my tenure in the state legislature, I've had the privilege of representing Eddy and Lee County in southeast New Mexico, and that is the heart of the oil and gas country in New Mexico. As the second highest oil producer in the nation, New Mexico continues to play a vital role in our nation's push for energy independence, reducing our reliance on foreign countries that often fail to meet our environmental standards. Energy production is more important than ever, and I'm proud that New Mexico has become the leader in providing cleaner, safer, more reliable, and affordable energy through the use of oil and natural gas production. In fiscal year 2022, the oil and gas contributed $10,000.8 billion to our state and local coffers, which was more than double the previous high in fiscal year of 2021. Annually, oil and gas their contribution makes up the average of 1/3 of New Mexico state budget, and the recent record level revenues were accomplished despite harmful reductions by the Biden administration. And according to data that was provided by Energy in Depth New Mexico, the Obama and Trump administrations held an average of 3.25 and 3.5 lease sales in New Mexico per year, respectively. And as president, while the Biden administration has only held a scheduled or total of 2 sales, with current average of 0.67 lease sales per year. Even if the Biden administration were to hold 3 sales in 2023, it will have only offered the average of 1.7 lease sales per year in New Mexico. This is significantly less than the Obama and Trump administration. Despite these facts, I'm proud to share that in my home county, Lee County, it is rated as #1 county in the nation for oil production. This production has led to historic funding for public schools locally and throughout the state. Roughly 1/3 of the state's public education funding is derived from oil and gas, providing $1.4 billion annually to support our students and teachers. As a longtime school board member of the Eunice Public School District, they allow us to, and I apologize, be the beneficiary. So Lee County is beneficiary of $48.7 million for our public schools. That was in fiscal year 2022. And it supports 14,793 students and 1,343 teachers that reside in my district. This funding aids our teachers, our students, our superintendents in actually adding the needs for the most at-risk students. And these allow us to produce an education for our students that are beyond what capability is of the district alone. These figures are more than $283 million, which was provided by the industry to New Mexico's higher education. And it's clear that the oil and gas not only is funding our current needs, but our future needs and our successes. Unfortunately, the Biden administration position on energy jeopardizes those very dollars and risks the quality of life for my family and my constituents. Oil and gas production from public lands accounts for roughly 1/4 of the annual United States production, and limits on the federal drilling is disproportionately impacts New Mexico, which depends heavily on the revenue from our share of the extraction royalties. Any significant revenue reduction caused by the imposing production limits would result in catastrophic cuts to our public schools, our infrastructure, our public safety, and New Mexicans' health. At a time when New Mexico ranks below the national average on economic opportunity, the oil and gas industry provides more than 134,000 New Mexicans with high-paying jobs. Meanwhile, the revenue received by the state supports construction maintenance of our roads, highways, and helps put officers in our communities to help keep us safe. The positive impacts of oil and gas can be seen each day, it being with the school buses driving our kids to and from school, our clothes we wear, the technology in our classroom, and the workforce we use. Our everyday necessities and the affordable and reliable energy is heating our homes of my constituents, their families, as well as it is time for both the state and federal government to work together in adopting an all-energy policy where the traditional fossil fuels and alternative energy can be included in comprehensive effort to secure our nation's energy. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today, and I'm standing ready to work with you to make an effort a reality. Thank you.
The chair thanks the witness for his testimony. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ackerman for 5 minutes.
Chairman Westerman, Subcommittee Chairman Stauber, distinguished members of the committee, on behalf of the 400-plus members of the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, first and foremost, thank you for being here. Thank you for your support, and thank you for having us here. New Mexico is the second largest oil-producing state in America. Our industry continues to provide the energy people need to live their lives. Through innovation, technology, and the industry's ability to exceed environmental standards, New Mexico operators supply our nation and world with cleaner, more affordable oil and natural gas energy. Because of our prolific Permian and San Juan basins and a dedicated workforce of 134,000 strong, New Mexico operators produced another record-breaking year, and the industry remains the #1 source of revenue in the state budget of New Mexico. New Mexico's oil and gas industry generated over $63.3 billion in oil and gas revenue in fiscal year 22, an increase of 132%, which generated a record $10.8 billion in state and local revenue this past year. $5.8 billion goes to the state general fund, $5 billion to the other state and local tax revenues, reserve fund, and permanent fund. The growth will have an unprecedented impact on the state of New Mexico during this fiscal year. The $5.8 billion to the state's general fund equates to about 35% of the New Mexico state budget, a contribution the oil and gas industry has achieved consecutively since fiscal year 14. With the growth of our industry, these funds ensure New Mexico will have the resources to invest in our children's education. Our oil and gas industry revenue supported $1.4 billion for public and higher education, operating budgets, as well as an additional $268 million in new capital outlay spending for public school construction and renovation. Our oil and gas industry funds also support vital infrastructure, such as the construction of new roads and highways, which keep New Mexicans and our supply chains moving. Our funds also help New Mexico put more first responders and public safety officers on the street, helping to keep our communities safer. From Raton to Las Cruces and Gallup to Tucumcari, the positive impact of our industry is tremendous for all New Mexicans. This fiscal and economic leadership goes hand in hand with environmental stewardship and the protection of our state's natural resources. Our operators around the state are consistently working to ensure the oil and natural gas produced here is cleaner, safer, and more environmentally sound than anywhere else in the world. We are your neighbors, We take great pride in working together and giving back to our communities to help make them stronger and better for all of our families. With energy demand increasing around the world, our industry workforce remains strong, committed to providing the energy America needs while moving New Mexico forward. Energy produced here is vital to our national security. Thank you for your time.
I thank the witness for his testimony. The chair now recognizes Ms. Bentley for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Tracy Bentley, and I am the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Permian Strategic Partnership, also known as PSP. I am grateful for the opportunity to share our work with you and that you have chosen to host this hearing right here in the Permian, which not only leads the nation in energy production, but is also a place where innovation, private industry, and the private sector all come together in a very unique and powerful way. PSP is a partnership of 20 oil and gas companies operating in the Permian Basin, which includes West Texas and southeastern New Mexico. Our companies who are members of our partnership are listed in my written oral testimony. PSP was founded in 2018. Our mission is to strengthen and improve the quality of life for Permian Basin residents by partnering with federal, state, and local leaders to develop and implement strategic plans that foster superior schools, safer roads, quality health care, and a well-trained workforce. In 5 short years since our founding, the PSP has directly invested nearly $125 million of our own dollars in projects across the region, but we've leveraged these dollars into collaborative investments totaling $975 million. In 2022 alone, we committed $32.6 million towards education, workforce, healthcare, and road safety initiatives, all of which will support the region's crucial social and economic infrastructure. Our work for future generations begins with investing in education. 1 out of every 3 residents in the Permian reads below a 3rd grade level. Polling of PSP member company employees has shown that public education is the single greatest factor in evaluating a location change, and it is equally important to families already living here in the Permian. The majority of our students are not meeting grade level standards, and we are over 50% of our students are economically disadvantaged. Progress is being made, but we still face the challenge of exponential growth. PSP has directly invested over $47 million in education initiatives across our region. As one example, we announced a partnership with the Cal Ripken Senior Foundation to provide $7.5 million towards the creation of 134 state-of-the-art STEM facilities in schools across our region. This will impact 3,000 teachers and 60,000 students. While the robust curriculum is critical to our educational success, it means little if there is nobody there to teach it. Our classrooms are facing massive shortages of qualified teachers. And while this is a problem that cannot be solved with any single initiative, we believe that one key element is to provide professional development opportunities for our teachers. We have invested more than $4 million in helping teachers go through the rigorous process to become National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, to become certified. When it comes to healthcare, our region has a high prevalence of chronic conditions, including, among others, obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. A recent healthcare assessment shows 25% of residents right here in Midland and Odessa seek complex inpatient care outside of the Permian, while 45% of the rest of the region leave the region for inpatient care. This is unacceptable. PSP has invested $53 million with our partners, including 2 of our outstanding regional universities, of course, the University of Texas Permian Basin, Texas Tech University, Southeast New Mexico College in Carlsbad, and New Mexico Junior College in Hobbs. PSP has helped expand access to 14 different types of certifications, residencies, fellowships, and behavioral health professionals, providing Permian Basin residents a local pathway to fulfilling careers while also ensuring that local businesses' workforce needs are met. Truck drivers quite literally drive the economy here, and the Permian is facing a severe shortage of certified truck drivers. In fact, a recent study that we supported indicate that drivers were the leading occupational shortage among skilled workers in our area. Last month, we announced our partnership with Odessa College, a $3.5 million investment to expand their truck driving academy, and we hope to do something similar in Southeast New Mexico. This will provide essential training in high-demand, high-paying careers for nearly 100 Permian Basin residents per year, while also making our roads safer. These are just a few examples of our efforts towards improving healthcare, education, and workforce development in our communities. Our work is made possible through each of our members' vision and long-term commitment to our region and to our communities. Members of the committee, we ask you to partner with us. By supporting responsible energy development in our region, you are supporting our efforts and our investment in an area that the United States and the world will rely on for many, many decades to come. We look forward to working with you to make transformative progress through strategic public-private partnerships in our region. Thank you.
The chair thanks the witness for her testimony. The chair will now recognize members for 5 minutes for questions, and I will begin by recognizing myself. Mr. Gallegos, we were in Roswell with another member of Congress a little over a year ago, and we talked about the devastation that this administration has and the reduced in the royalty or the production for the communities. We talk about health care, police, fire, ambulance, education, roads, etc. I remember asking an individual who wasn't supportive of the industry. I said, how are you going to make this up? I couldn't believe the answer I got, but I'm going to share it with you. Through the sales tax of selling marijuana. I thought, I can't believe that a professional answered that way. I don't know how much and how high people have to get to sell that much to make up for what you're described. And that's unacceptable. I wore the police uniform for 23 years. You're gonna make that up by doing this to our kids? That's why when Representative Pfluger said this was supposed to be a bipartisan, the chair and I invited everybody from the committee. And I'm disappointed that my colleagues from the other side of the aisle didn't come to this valuable hearing. Mr. Ackerman, thank you for participating today. Joe Biden claimed in the State of the Union that, quote, oil and gas will end in 10 years, end quote. We know that isn't true. It's not even feasible. However, he's trying. Although perhaps unlawful, he has crippled leasing as much as he possibly can. Much of the federal production right now is occurring on leases offered under the Trump administration and previous administrations. Under Trump, 153 parcels per year were offered. Under Obama, 103 parcels, and under Biden, only 9.6. This shortfall will unjustly be felt by your membership. With Joe Biden choking leases on energy, which allows energy demand to skyrocket, how will your membership react to the dwindling acres available, and how can we in Congress help?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question. No industry has been more unjustly villainized than oil and gas. On all fronts, never has a more vital industry to the security of this nation faced a bigger onslaught of attacks. Vague and random ESG policies have shut down financing. From a number standpoint, 53 to 54% of the production within New Mexico is on federal land. The other 35% is on state land. So when you look at the challenges both on the federal and state level, any slowing of lease granting, any feet dragging on the permitting side, slows down 53 to 54% of the entire production within the state of New Mexico. The oil and gas industry within New Mexico has proven from a time when oil actually went negative during COVID, you had to pay people to take oil. They've increased production 132% in a short amount of time when costs in the oil field, labor is hard to get, anywhere from 75 to 150% increase in cost of inputs because of the supply chain challenges. The industry can provide, and we're grateful for any help and support we can get to minimize the effects of the current progressive agenda.
Thank you, and I can tell you that the permitting reform is a priority for Mr. Westerman and the other members of the Natural Resources Committee. Senator Gallegos, thank you for participating. Your constituents are hardest hit by this administration's keep it in the ground mentality. Building off my question to Mr. Ackerman, As the Trump and previous administration's leases are completed and we now fall to the few acres offered by the Biden administration, how do your counties, townships, and municipalities brace for future catastrophic funding shortfalls?
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. So what happens is, because we've ridden the cycle before, in Southeast, we've always learned to be able to restore some money back. But what's going to happen drastically here now, because of the permitting, is I predict we have 2 to 5 years maybe of permits that are out there. Production is on a peak during the initial drill, but it drops off significantly. And I don't think it hurts just my communities. I think it hurts the state as a whole. Right now, we're spending money recklessly throughout the state because we have an abundance because of oil and gas. You take that out, we're going to go back to what we've historically done, taking money from schools, from safety, public safety, because you have to find places you can pull back. We have to have a balanced budget every year for the state of New Mexico. Well, when that money's not there, we have to pull it back from areas that we can. And a large part of that, Mr. and members, is in staff. At some point in time, you have to lay people off because we do not have the funds available to do it. So what happens to oil and gas in the good time is a blessing to the state, and on the other side, it hurts the whole state by losing people and opportunities.
And I thank you for your answers. The chair will now recognize the full committee chair, Mr. Westerman, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman Stauber. Thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. Senator Gallegos, I have to say I'm a little bit envious, having served in the Arkansas legislature where we had a balanced budget. And when I read your testimony before, when I read your written testimony, there was a number that stood out, and it's the $10.8 billion in oil and gas revenues that are going to the state. And so I did a little further research. I saw that the population of New Mexico is 2.1 million, and the population of Arkansas is almost 3.1 million. Yet our balanced budget last year was $6 billion, and the state of New Mexico's balanced budget was $9.44 billion. So you've got a lot to work with because of these oil and gas revenues, and you just mentioned that some wasteful spending, but how on earth do you waste that much money? You know, we were up there this morning. You're obviously not spending it on the roads.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. Actually, we keep trying to work on infrastructure, but what happens is the corridor, the Albuquerque area, they have the majority of the legislators, so they get what they want, not what we need. But the bad thing is, you go back in history, Governor Martinez did a hard job of cutting our budget. Ever since she's been gone, every year we increase the budget, and it's one of those where you can't see the positive attributes. New Mexico is still really poor state. Like you said, our streets and roads are really poor condition. Our children at 50th in the nation on education. So we're throwing money at things without expecting a return on our investment or an increase for our kids. They're just frivolously, I voted no last year on giving money out. The only one in the Senate voted no, because I think we need to look forward 10 years out, 5 years out, at some point in time and say, okay, here's what we're going to have at the end of this time. If oil and gas takes a reduction, where will we be? And our governor and the other people on the other side of the aisle, and even some of my colleagues, are happy to be spending their money today, not thinking about tomorrow.
So most of that revenue is being generated in Lee and Eddy counties, and it goes to Santa Fe and on to Albuquerque, I guess. There's this nursery rhyme about a goose that laid a golden egg that you might want to inform your colleagues about there in Santa Fe. Mr. Ackerman, there's a lot of rumors that have been floating around the past couple of years. The oil and gas industry's been vilified. You know, we were all shocked when the president's spokesperson came out and talked about these 9,000 or 10,000 permits that aren't being utilized. And I was waiting for the day to be in a place where somebody could set the record straight on that. And also, when you're doing that, can you talk about how long it takes to develop a project, and how a delay right now may not even be seen, but 5 or 10 years from now, we're creating gaps that really you don't get to go back and make that up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your question. Also, how to know whether or not you live in New Mexico is not, or not is whether you have a cracked windshield from all those great roads that you were talking about earlier. So it takes about 6 to 12 months to get a permit. And you need between 30 and 50 permits to drill a well. And the average cost of putting a well and committing to a well on a site is about $50,000 a day. So if you look at the dollars and cents that are associated with what we're speaking about here, it's a real challenge. And with the delays in permitting, with some of the new challenges to the San Juan Basin, the 10th Court of Appeals legislation that just passed, we're concerned about it being a foothold to the Permian. Any of these delays, one of the other things that you hear about is also the challenge with the dollars, and the challenge of why the oil companies aren't investing back into more production. And at the end of the day, what's the incentive for an oil company when you have an administration that is outwardly saying they're going to shut you down? In the most recent State of the Union address said, for 10 years, we need you for another 10 years. Well, the forecast for oil and gas within the state of New Mexico is by 2050, we're going to be 25% domestic production. We're not going anywhere, but who's going to invest when,
those actions don't exactly promote investor confidence.
Correct, sir.
See that my time's expired, so I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Westerman. I'll turn it over for 5 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany, for 5 minutes.
So I hope all of you from Ector County understand the challenge that Senator Gallegos has issued to all of you with his testimony. Lee County in New Mexico being the #1 county in the nation for oil production, you've got some work to do. He's coming into your state and laying down the gauntlet.
We love West Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. Ms. Bentley, we hear all about kids that get liberal arts degrees, end up in their parents' basements, $100,000 in debt and all the rest. Is that what the jobs look like in the Permian Basin?
It is not, no. We have many, many jobs currently and also in the future where they're STEM-related, many of them, but many of them are skilled labor jobs, such as electricians and plumbers. We need accountants. The whole gamut is available right here and will be for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I was really struck today in the tour that we did over in the Hobbs area at the number of professionals that are employed, and it really struck me that the number of people, whether they're engineers, geologists, whatever they may be, there's a lot of high-skilled jobs to come into an area, isn't there?
There absolutely is. We like to say that if anywhere in the country really should have a robust career technical education program, it should be right here in the Permian.
Senator Gallegos, did I hear you correctly saying if you see reduced oil production in New Mexico, that you may see cuts in education and health care? Is that accurate?
Thank you for that question. Actually, we've seen it on a periodic table whenever oil and gas drops. Historically, we've gone to schools first. So what happens, they have a fund that they hold back for bad times. We in the legislature just take it from them. We don't ever replace it. We just take it from them, and that really hurts our students. We're, I think, in another downturn, we're going to have to look broader. So I know that we've taken from public safety and education, but it's going to hit more areas because we keep increasing the budget in all areas in our state. So the governor's just spreading the wealth everywhere. At some point in time, you'll have to pull back in order to make that budget work. So,
Mr. Ackerman, have you done an analysis when the effects of the reduced number of permits that are being issued, have you done an analysis when that's going to hit? I mean, you see that production's still strong as a result of the permits that have been issued. Do you have a projection when this is going to hit and you're going to see less production, fewer wells as a result of issuing fewer permits?
Thank you for the question. I don't have an official look at that as we've looked at the challenges that are facing the industry and the challenges that continue to grow. We don't have there's so many different variables at play here. I don't have an exact number for that. No, sir.
Senator Gallegos, do you have a guesstimate of when you expect to see that?
Well, and thank you for that. Also, the just seeing how it's been in the past, I would say between 2 and 5 years, because and projections are we've got plenty of oil and gas. It's not about the product. It's about the timeline that you have and the gap that it's going to create. I think we're going to have a cliff effect whenever the permitting gets to the point that we're not replacing the permits. Then I see oil and gas drop, and just because of regular production out of that well, if you don't continue drilling, then the production falls off. So I would say, just my thoughts, I say 2.5 to 5 years we'll see a drop, unless the feds start allowing us to have permits.
If a member of the New Mexico congressional delegation asked for a federal energy production hearing in southeast New Mexico in your district, would you welcome them?
I would. I don't see that coming because they are totally against oil and gas. We love, I sent a text to my last Congresswoman, Yvette Harrell, earlier. She would love to be here. But in reality, the other side of the aisle in New Mexico wants to do away with oil and gas production, so they're not in favor of the permitting process at all, even at the cost to our students and our kids in our community.
I want to close with just 2 quick things, Mr. Chairman. One, as Chairman Stauber mentioned earlier, we are looking hard at NEPA, which is one of the biggest concerns when you're talking about forest management, mining, oil production, wherever the case may be. We do need reforms to NEPA, the regulatory policy that governs on federal lands, and we're hoping to be able to get some changes to that and hopefully get some bipartisan agreement. And finally, I would just say to you, for those people that are chasing the green fantasy, the Permian is a problem, and you should smile every day when you go to work knowing that you're stopping people who want to impoverish Americans with higher energy prices. I hope you smile every day as you continue that robust production in the Permian, because you are standing up for the people of the United States of America. Thank you for the work you do. I yield back.
Thank you for the questions. And finally, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I couldn't agree more with my colleague, Mr. Tiffany, about that. Thank you for standing in the gap. And as a small correction to my facts on the 14 million, my point was to say that the Permian Basin is producing almost 50% of that, which is about 6 to 7% of the worldwide production. Just an incredible amount. Ms. Bentley, Permian Strategic Partnership is really a one-of-a-kind organization that's doing something that's supporting national security. If you can talk about the importance of national security, and then maybe give us a sense and scope of how many people are employed in the Permian Basin by this industry, and then the family members that are impacted positively by this industry. And I'll have a follow-up here in a second.
Thank you, Congressman Pfluger. Well, you said it best earlier when you said we are in the midst right here of the world's largest and most secure supply of energy for many reasons. But number 2, I think it's important to remember why that is. And a lot of that is due to the hardworking men and women that every day go to work and produce some of the cleanest energy of anywhere in the country and the world as well. And so when we hear rhetoric from Washington, D.C., that that's not important anymore, you can imagine the effect that it has on a region like ours and, of course, across the country. But the truth of the matter is we know that the world is going to need our energy for decades and decades to come, so we keep at it. I will tell you also that when my companies are sitting around the boardroom talking, and I ask them what keeps them up at night, workforce comes up without fail almost every single time. We are worried about having the workforce for the future that we're going to need to continue to produce the energy that the world relies on. And so making sure that we have the infrastructure, both social and what we think of as traditional infrastructure, to sustain our workforce is becoming more and more important every day.
No, thank you for that. If we go the path of Western Europe and we attack fossil fuels, and we enact the policies that President Biden has done over the last 2 years, what's the economic impact here? I mean, Texas had $24 billion paid in from the oil and gas industry. $24 billion paid to the state in local taxes, state taxes that supported education, that supported roads, that supported infrastructure. So if we continue down this path, what's the economic impact we can expect?
You're exactly right. And we heard the good senator from New Mexico say earlier that oil and gas revenue is about a third, maybe a little over a third of New Mexico's state budget, and that's just our 2 states. When you look at the national level and globally, there's no other greater economic driver when it comes to energy than right here in the Permian. We employ, I think the statistic is nationally over 900,000 workers in the energy industry. And the revenue, of course, that comes from this area is paid off all the way down the chain, dividends over dividends over dividends. So we understand that while we're producing much needed energy, the economic, downfall that would happen if we keep seeing what we're seeing happen in Washington is that it's going to be devastating to all of us.
Senator, thanks for standing in the gap in New Mexico in a very, very tough environment. I can't for the life of me understand why you would want to cut off the funding stream that produces almost 50% of your state's budget. It just doesn't add up here. So thank you for what you do. Mr. Ackerman, same to you. And let's get back to those 9,000 permits. I cringe every time I hear those. And you just mentioned 30 to 50 permits per well.
Yes, sir.
I always come back to 9,000 and I say, well, we actually need 90,000 permits. I know that that's not accurate. Can you tell us how many permits we need in New Mexico and how many have been impacted? I mean, we talked about a production cliff. So how many permits do we need roundabout right now, new permits?
Wow. Thank you for the question. Honestly, if we just got the permits that are being delayed right now with challenges, APD challenges that are going on in Wyoming and New Mexico, Center for Biological Diversity and some of the other environmental NGOs that are challenging us, there's 400 APDs that are tied up there. The 10th Circuit of Appeals issue in the northwestern part of the state is challenging hundreds more. This could shut down production for a year. I've got companies up there. My incoming chairman for next year is worried about whether or not his company is going to be able to operate because they're, like I said, it's $50,000 a day that you're committing to a well. And every day that well is not active, it's costing $50,000 a day. The ROI on that from a business standpoint just isn't there. When you start to look at the numbers that's necessary, we'll start with just what we have and be able to drill what we have and then look at where we can go from here. But honestly, what would help most is just to stop the feet dragging and the way that some of the challenges in something that could help us more than anything else is some clarity in the regulatory and legal environment, in legislative environment, so that there's not these holes that people can drive truck throughs and grab on and tie things up and slow us down.
Well, thank you for that. And the production cliff that the senator talked about, when supply starts to decrease and the price starts to increase, inflation will continue to increase. We know that affordable energy helps those who need it the most in the lowest earning bracket in our country. And I know, Senator, that you probably experienced that just like everyone who's elected experiences that. We need to unleash America's energy potential. It starts right here. It starts with permitting. It starts with doing things in a market-based reality, not this fictional green fantasy that my colleague mentioned. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for being in Odessa, Texas, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Pfluger. And now the chair is going to request if there's a second round of questionings. We have some time, and with time, we always want to get as many questions as we can. But before I do that, I want to thank the University of Texas Permian Basin for your hospitality in such a short period of time. We thank you very much. And I would also like to thank our staff. So we come here and we sit at the table. It's a lot of staff time to get it done, and the natural resources staff that came with us from DC and other parts. I want to thank you for your hard work. It's worth it. So I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. We'll go to the same order. we always talk about all of the best energy. I used to say all of the above energy, but all of the best energy. And one of the things that we're seeing across America is this forced transition. And I want to bring you back to critical minerals mining for a minute. We need to be, as August said, energy dominant. We need to be critical mineral dominant too. That's part of our strategic national security. Those are two areas we can't get wrong. And right now, under this administration, they're not looking at it that way. They're putting us behind. So, Ms. Bentley, thank you for the work that you do strengthening the quality of life of those living in the Permian Basin. Your testimony discussed the students missing key benchmarks, reading, math, and science, and your organization's work to overcome those issues. How would the Biden cuts to education through leasing restrictions set back the progress you've already made?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that they would be very, very significant in that you heard Senator Gallegos earlier say how much of oil and gas revenue in the state of New Mexico, for example, goes directly towards education, not only teacher salary, but also per pupil spending, and also to actually build brick and mortar these educational institutions. And so if you start whittling that away, my goodness, you can see what's immediately going to happen. And I feel like New Mexico is one of the best examples of that. And I can tell you that as far as the rest of the region here in West Texas, our companies are able to make large investments, like what I've described earlier, because businesses, it's good business here. But the second that starts to erode, is the second that these kind of investments we're going to have to take a harder look at. And so education is the key to everything that we've found. Without a solid education system, everything else kind of starts to crumble around it.
Well, as Mr. Westerman said, we took a tour of CTEC, very, very, very impressed, and I know you were part of that. We must permit by rule, not permit by decree. This is what this administration has been doing, and we're seeing the devastating effects with that. So to anybody on the panel, how do your friends and neighbors cope when the White House decrees that they must do with less and that your rural lifestyles must be squeezed dry? Any of the panel members?
I'll start. Well, I can tell you, and it kind of goes to what I said earlier. We can say that we're in an energy transition, and I think my industry would tell you we prefer the word energy expansion. But regardless, as we hear the condemnation and the talk about we've got to move away from traditional energy, and yet we know that is just not even possible, not even in the few years to in the near time future. That's just not feasible. And so to hear our industry get vilified, as we said earlier, in a forum that's not reality, but yet the men and women of my neighbors and our neighbors are expected to get up every morning, and they do, and they're happy to do so, but knowing that they're operating under decision makers who are not living in reality is difficult to watch for sure.
Yeah, Senator?
Well, in our area, everything rotates around oil and gas, and not just the cost of the oil and gas. Your gasoline's one issue, but if you start looking and you talk to the people in my community about the cost of products, you look at our iPhone, you look at our tires, everything that we use in our nation is driven by oil and gas product. My wife, I use this often, she says, please don't do that. It takes her 2 hours to get ready to go to Walmart. She's going to put on makeup and get ready to be out in public. What is the cost of the petroleum products going to be in makeup? I'll still have to pay it, regardless of what the cost is, but that's a necessity to her. And we're taking away these necessary pieces of our society because we're trying to hurt oil and gas. What are the solar panels going to come from? What are the windmills going to come from? You look at the freeze here in Texas. Why did it freeze? They didn't have heaters in the petroleum that helped rotate. So there's so much that they don't have figured out, but all it does is hurt all of us. And it starts right here.
Mr. Ackerman?
There's no harder question to answer, especially in a state that's boasting $10.8 billion in money that goes to the state government. I get asked all the time, how to reconcile you all brought it up earlier today, how do you reconcile the fact that this industry that means so much to the state and also to the security of this nation, the vilification and the shutting down of it, you can't reconcile them. There's no more difficult question than I get asked on a daily basis.
Well, your constituents and friends and neighbors matter. Our rural way of life matters. And no matter what, you have an ally in the 4 members of Congress sitting in front of you. I will now turn the next 5 minutes over to Chairman Westerman for the additional 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Stauber. Ms. Bentley, one of the things that we've had to endure the past few years serving in the minority party were hearings where we were inundated with witnesses about environmental justice, social justice, and I'm still not sure I ever comprehended what these witnesses, the point they were trying to get across. I've traveled a lot of different places in the world, and where I've seen what looked to me like the most environmental injustice and social injustice and governance injustice were in areas of poverty, where you had rogue governments and socialist governments in control. And to the contrary, I thought we were actually providing more environmental and social justice to American citizens by giving them lower cost energy, by giving them the good things that come from having a reliable energy sector. But I've always wondered, how would somebody that's out here on the front lines, how would they answer that question about how energy production in the Permian has resulted in better environmental justice, better social justice? You talked about health care, you talked about the education system, but what would you like to tell those people that are accusing the good people here in the Permian Basin that are producing energy of creating environmental and social injustice?
Thank you for that question. I would tell them that the 20 oil and gas companies over the last 5 years have spent $125 million of their own dollars and leveraged that into $1 billion and put it right back in the community via healthcare, education, roads and infrastructure, and workforce development. And I don't know of anywhere else in the country, quite frankly, who has this public-private partnership. And nobody told them to do it. We didn't ask government to do it for us. We took the leadership, stood it up, and asked others to come in and partner with us. So as far as the environmental aspects, this area has some of the best stewards of the land that I've ever seen, and that's not only energy producers, it's our farmers and our ranchers and everybody who lives here. We're all raising our kids here and our families here as well, so it behooves us, and we want the exact same thing. And I've been to many basins across the country when it comes to oil and gas production, and I can tell you that some of the cleanest energy is coming right here from the Permian.
Good answer. That's what I thought. Mr. Ackerman, you represent industries that produce on both or on private, state, and federal lands. So I'm assuming you're familiar with all the permitting issues they go through. How long does it take in New Mexico, and you may be familiar with Texas, to get a permit to drill on private land going through the private or state land going through the state permitting agency?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. There's very little private. It's about 53 to 54% is federal. Another 35%, there is some private. It's about 6 to 12 months just to get the permits. But then with the challenges we're seeing in different legal venues to those things, they can get frozen at any time. That's one of the big concerns we have with this 10th Circuit of Appeals issue that we have right now. It's getting a toehold in the Northwest, and it's going to creep down into the Permian and affect what we're doing here.
So 6 to 12 months on federal land?
Yes, sir.
Going through the BLM?
Yes, sir.
So what about state land or private land? How long does it take?
One of the issues that they're facing on the state side is people. They're trying to go out and get more people and recruit for the permitting process. Hopefully the new budget will get passed with the $10.8 billion of extra money that's going to be out there, and we can get some more people involved to help with the permitting process, but it's similar.
Yeah, so I think some of the folks we were with this morning were saying sometimes it's a matter of weeks to get a permit if you're not going through the federal government. Have you seen any discrepancy on the environmental stewardship of the land going through the state permitting process versus the federal permitting process?
The state's been much easier to work with. The federal, there's been no real predictability. You never know what it's going to be, and that's one of the big issues when you're asking people to invest.
But out on the ground, is the land protected? Is the environment and the public protected more when there's a federal permit versus when there's a state permit?
New Mexico has the highest regulatory environment there is as far as capturing methane and some of the other things. We literally lead the nation in the world in what we do as far as taking care of the environment.
So the state can permit more quickly and more effectively than the federal government can.
Sure.
So would it be, as policymakers, should we look at policy to maybe take that power from the federal agencies and let the state agencies do the permitting?
It's a great question, Mr. Chairman. I think, honestly, at a bare minimum, that is one of the alternatives. Also, inviting the industry to the table and helping to have the industry present and provide an operational standpoint to what it really means when you're establishing permitting. We don't have a seat at the table right now. So why not bring the experts and the innovators to the table when it comes to helping to bring regulatory and permitting issues to some sort of reality?
I'm out of time again. Again, thank you all for your testimony, and I yield back.
The chair thanks the member for his questions, and now I will turn it over to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany, for 5 minutes.
So last week, I introduced a bill called the Farm Act, the Future Agriculture Retention and Maintenance Act. And what it does is it disallows subsidies for intermittent sources of power like wind and solar if it's located on productive farmland coming from Wisconsin, America's dairy land. We got a lot of terrific agricultural producers, and we're seeing this spread of intermittent sources of power, which, by the way, up by us will be on at most 20% of the time, maybe 25% of the time. Clearly, the definition of intermittent sources of power. And what we're saying with the bill is that producing food is more important than producing energy. Now, producing energy is really important, right? But there is one thing that I believe is more important, and that is producing food. And we're sidelining agricultural land, productive agricultural land, to put in intermittent sources of power when we have baseload power that's being produced right here in places like the Permian. And what we have found out is those subsidies amount to as much as $50,000 an acre for those intermittent sources of power. The tax code is being used at the federal level to drive that. And so you have rich subsidies that are going to wealthy developers, and they're converting farmland into a use which I would say is secondary to food production. And greatly concerned about that. Ms. Bentley, are your members asking for additional subsidies from the federal government?
No, sir, they are not.
Mr. Ackerman.
No, sir.
Mr. Gallegos, with the people that you represent in your Senate district, are any of them asking for additional subsidies from the federal government?
No, sir, we're not. We're asking to be let alone so that we can work in our own way.
That is the only question I had, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for those questions. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for 5 additional minutes.
Okay, thank you. Last summer, the EPA threatened a redesignation here, ozone attainment, because of a lawsuit from an outside group. And a non-attainment redesignation would be, I think, devastating to our local economy. In fact, when you look at places like San Antonio, Texas, which had that happen to them, the cost is estimated to be upwards of $36 billion. Let me start with you, Mr. Ackerman. Weaponization. What types of President Biden weapons have you seen aimed at this industry in New Mexico? Whether it's EPA related or SEC related, can you kind of give us a laundry list of the types of weapons to make good on the promise to end fossil fuels?
Thank you for the question. I don't have time to give you a laundry list. There's only 5 minutes on the agenda. I will say when somebody blatantly comes out and says we're trying to shut you down, dries up financial markets, right there. the lack of consistency, we keep going back to permitting reform and the need for that, the regulatory environment. There's no predictability. And then getting beat up on the back end of that for not putting enough money into it when the price of gasoline goes high. It's just you just can't make this stuff up, for lack of a better way to say it. So, and there's two fronts to that. There's also the environmental NGO. I'm also very familiar with the non-attainment that we're looking at challenging as well. When we're looking at, out of the 70 parts per billion that are an issue from the ozone non-attainment, only 3 of them are attributable to oil and gas, but yet we're going to go after oil and gas for 3 out of the 70 parts per billion. From issuing permitting to challenging leasing, it's time to put us first.
I would encourage, whether it's NMOGA or Texoga or any of the trade organizations, to continue to provide us with these details, because at the end of the day, these costs are being passed on to consumers. Endangered species, this week I plan to introduce a listing reform act that I think would modernize the Endangered Species Act. Things like the lesser prairie chicken. These are things that are not just impacting the oil and gas industry. In fact, they're impacting agricultural productions. They're impacting green energy, if you want to call it green, intermittent, unreliable energy. One thing that was said about the predictability, and I think that's the investment environment here, due to the unpredictability, we are acting like a third world country. When you see the Keystone Pipeline basically being expropriated from the government. Ms. Bentley, if you can kind of talk to me about what your member companies are saying, the lack of predictability, how is that affecting their willingness to invest in new operations with that environment that we're seeing?
Well, I feel very blessed in that for my 20 companies, some of them have 30, 40, 50-year plans to be in the Permian. And some of them will even tell you if they're going to be anywhere in the world, it's going to be right here in the Permian. And so for those reasons, prices will rise and fall, and hopefully the federal government will loosen up and understand how important we are. But we're in it for the long haul. We're going to be here for as long as the community needs us and as long as we can help in this community. Having said that, though, I will say that it certainly makes it harder to make those decisions when the cost of doing business skyrockets and you're getting permitted to death, without a doubt.
The ESG issues are overwhelming throughout the country, and I think it's been said on this panel that the unwillingness to invest is because there's lack of predictability. Senator Gallegos, when it comes to New Mexico, how is this impacting your constituents, the communities?
Earlier, we're talking about the long list. You look at the flaring, the fracking, and even the leasing and the permitting process. It hurts the majors and the independents. And those independents may have a marginal well that they get 10 barrels a day, and they may be living a family off that income, and it's not there anymore. If we could take those people that are against us out to the oil field and show them the technology that's out there now. I used to work for a natural gas company, and we're always looking for leaks because you want to retain that product for sale, not to out into the atmosphere. I think for years we've been doing a great job of protecting the environment because it's costing us if we don't. And to see what they're doing, they're willing to do to these small communities, just because they're in a high rise in New York doesn't give them the opportunity to do that to us. Rural New Mexico and rural Texas have people that live here and will be here as long as we can. You shut off oil and gas, it devastates Eunice. We would have to flee the area because it is the base of our existence. And that hurts each one of my
And I would say it will devastate every place in America, every place, rural or urban.
It will.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair is going to take, before we gavel out, the chair is going to take a moment of personal privilege and allow one more question, and then some closing statements by the full chair, Westerman. So, Congressman Tiffany, you've asked for one question. Chair recognizes you.
Real quickly, will the proposed rule, the waters of the United States, affect your industry? Are you familiar with it?
I'm not up to speed on it, I'm sorry.
We could come back to it offline. I was just wondering if you had studied that at all. Thank you.
Thank you. and the committee full chair, Mr. Westerman, for some closing comments.
Thank you, Chairman Stauber. And again, thank you to the hospitality here in Odessa and UT Permian Basin for allowing us to use your facilities for our first field hearing of the 118th Congress. Representative Pfluger, thank you for your leadership and for helping organize. And I do want to mention that, with federal lands being one of the big issues under our committee, we could have had this hearing in New Mexico. We've got two of the New Mexico delegation actually sit on the Natural Resources Committee, but out of respect for members who don't want to have hearings in their district, we moved just across the state line here into Odessa. But members may not want to hear this in their district, but we're going to get the message out to show the American people what's happening in the real world, and we're right here in the real world today. So again, thank you to the witnesses and to everyone who put effort into making this hearing take place. We're going to take the information we've learned, again, back to D.C. We're going to write legislation, and we're going to pass that out of the House and hopefully work in a bipartisan manner with some in the Senate and some in the House to actually get this legislation on the President's desk so that he can do the right thing for America, for U.S. supply chain issues, for national security, and for the future of our country. I yield back.
Thank you. And I, too, want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Thursday, February 16th. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.